world. From where I sit, there just ain't enough damn dog. I'm dog world. From where I sit, there just ain't enough damn dog.
I see things.
I'm beast. You laugh at an old man. This isn't laughs at no good. Slave of the fucking gods. I see things. You laugh at an old man. This isn't laughs at no good. Slave of the fucking gods. I'm beast. Free your mind. I'm beast. Look into the darkness. Find the blazing star. I'm beast. Let it become the eclipse. I'm beast. Don't fear. I'm beast. Find the blazing star. Let it become the eclipse. I'm beast. Slave of the fucking god. I'm destroyed. I'm beast. Break the chains of slavery. I'm beast. Free your mind. I'm beast. Ride the lightning. I'm beast. Let it become the eclipse. I'm beast.
Attention passengers, Flight 888 to the optic nerve is now boarding Gate 17, scheduled to depart at 9:30 a.m.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. This episode, I got a bunch of us with us tonight talking about Mercury symbolism. I got myself, obviously, the Nick from the Occult Rejects. I got Lisa, the mad scientist, Occult Reject. I got my man, Jin the Ninja. What is going on? And I got Ethan Indigo. I got Tej. I got Headless Giant. And I got the OG himself, Robby Marx. All of their links are in the bottom to find all of their amazing work, which I highly suggest to please go check out. You may like hearing them on this show. I highly suggest to go listen to their own words on their own shows and in their own stuff. It's something to listen to, or I highly suggest it. And tonight we got, again, as usual, we got the Tarot Man himself and somebody I just love learning with or learning from. Somebody I will definitely have to say has probably impacted my magical journey in some way, believe it or not. So I appreciate it, Mario, and I appreciate you constantly coming back and working with us. Please let everybody know, in case there's new listeners, what the deal is with you and what's up.
Yeah, for sure. What's up, man? No, thanks for the invite, and I really appreciate the crew you've put together here. I really do get a lot out of everyone's insights and stuff, and you know, even when I'm not on the show, I listen and check out what's going on and stuff like that. But Symbolic Studies is my project, symbolicstudies.com. People can find all of my offerings there. I'm on YouTube and Patreon and Instagram and things like that. So I do offer tarot readings and other services too. But my foundation is really the tarot. And from there, you know, I got really into astrology and just uncovering the symbolic nature of every sign. So I put out content based on the signs during each sign itself, following the tropical, the tropical calendar, basically. So, yeah, that's my deal. And Mercury, man, it is really a heavy hitter with the planets, you know.
My favorite character.
For sure, right? I mean, it's one of these things, actually, where if there's like a planet that's worthy of many multiple episodes, it would be Mercury. And to be Mercurial is to change, right? Change and changing often. And so when I first got into Mercurial symbolism, it was hard for me to actually kind of like figure out sort of the nature of Mercury in a way, because it was associated with so many different things. And even when I go through the astrological year and I'm putting out content on each sign, I'm always like, man, there's a lot of Mercurial symbolism with Aries. Yeah, there's a lot of Mercurial symbolism with Taurus and Gemini, and it just goes on and on and on and on, and including the cards that correspond with the signs and stuff like that. And so, just to kind of get into it with Mercury, I think that a lot of cultures and a lot of systems, it's not uncommon to have like a catch-all phrase or a catch-all term that kind of encompasses maybe like spirit or ether, like in totality, right? I know there's even people who kind of use like Satan as an example as like that kind of catch-all sort of thing. Voodoo can kind of be that. The Force, in Star Wars is almost kind of similar to this. Mercury has also been this too, right? Mercury is almost kind of like, has been used as like a other term for like ether and spirit. And Mercury is a traveler, right? So like a lot of the mercurial figures are messengers or travelers. And so they're always going to and fro. They're always, delivering these messages and whatever. So, Mercury, Hermes, Thoth, I'll be probably using these interchangeably, synonymously, basically. But Hermes, Mercury is known for being like a psychopomp. So he goes between realms. And I have a very sort of like specific way in which I sort of imagine how he goes between realms, which we'll unpack at a certain point. And so he oftentimes is carrying like a bag or a satchel delivering these messages, right? Being the messenger of the gods. And when you look at statues and artwork with Mercury or Hermes, he has like winged, a winged cap. He has like wings on his sandals or his feet. And he's always too, one of the things that I find really interesting, he's always on one foot. That's like a classic sort of thing with Mercury or Hermes, right? So it's like he's about to go or he just kind of landed or something along these lines. He associates with the Magician card. Mercury corresponds with the Magician card. So there's a lot to unpack just with the Magician card and how it relates to Mercury. But I think one of the things actually, right, just to kind of get into that is the Magician card is the first card of the major arcana. There's the Fool, which I think has a lot of mercurial symbolism too, because the Fool is the only card traditionally that is shown actually traveling. Even the Chariot card, traditionally, the Chariot is actually stationary, and all of the other figures are either standing or they're throned or something along these lines. But the Fool is actually walking, right? And the Fool has a pole with him. And the first two cards in the major arcana, pole, wand symbolism is really like on display for sure. And so the Magician is holding that wand. He's holding it up to the heavens, right? To me, this is really interesting because he's holding it up and then he has one hand pointed to the ground. So this is the classic as above, so below axiom, right? And I think what he's basically saying is I connect heaven and earth. I connect heaven and earth. And I think in some ways he's saying I am the central pillar in the house of God, because that card corresponds with Beth, which means house. But, on a sort of like grander scale, it's the house of God, basically. And so this would be the world axis, in my opinion, right? Sort of the central pole that symbolically separates heaven and earth, but then also binds heaven and earth as well. This relationship has been referred to as the Great Triad, that there's a triune relationship between heaven, earth, and man. And so he is acting as that sort of central pillar or that symbolic bridge between the above and the below. This is actually how I think he gets between realms, is through the world axis, basically, right? The axis mundi. And so the axis mundi, there's so many symbols that relate to it, but the world tree or the tree is one classic axis mundi world axis symbol. And so when you see a serpent going up a tree, like in the Garden of Eden, that's very, very mercurial. And it's not unlike the dollar sign, in my opinion, right? Kind of like the S with the vertical line, right? And so to me, that is almost basically Mercury ascending to other realms, right? Going to other planes of existence. And so that's also mirrored in one of the symbols that closely relates to Mercury Hermes, which is the caduceus, right? So you have the twin serpents going up that wand, basically. That's not unlike the Kundalini serpents going up your spine, right? It's the same symbolism, pretty much. And so even the number 33 has been tied to Mercury too, amongst other, sort of deities and stuff like that. But we have 33 vertebrae in our spine. So to me, ascension symbolism and sort of something going upward, whether it's like a serpent or what have you, to me, that's like incredibly Mercurial, because he goes to these other planes, right? So he takes people. He's the guide of souls. And so I think a lot of figures actually start off, or a lot of like solar deities, when you look into their origin story, it's heavily Mercurial. I think Christ is a good example of this. I think Christ, when he has like a wand and he's doing magical things or whatever, he's basically Mercury pretty much. I think what's kind of happened with Christ is that he started off as being more Mercurial, and then he actually became solarized over time. So he became more closely tied to the sun. But I think you can make the case that actually Mercury was like his original sort of like influence or planet or something along these lines. Kind of related to that. Go ahead.
The first depictions of Jesus was with him holding a wand. So these are like,
exactly.
Yeah, he did have a
century.
wand. There's old depictions of him touching whoever he brought back with a wand. When he turns water to wine, I've seen depictions of him having a wand in his hand when he touching that and making a change. Very interesting.
Yeah, exactly right. 100%.
The Bible, of course, refers to Jesus as the shepherd of men, right? But before that, Poimander from the Asclepius. Thank you. He is described as the shepherd. Another biblical kind of descendant.
Right. Yeah. No, exactly right. And so the wand in and of itself is another world axis symbol, in my opinion. The wand symbolically represents energy being sent forth, not unlike the phallus. And Mercury has been heavily tied to phallic symbolism. So anything sort of phallic, I think the wand, the tree, definitely, what was I just going to say? Or like the pillar as well. There's some classic illustrations of Hermes Mercury, like in between pillars. In many ways, he kind of represents the central pillar. He represents the middle pillar, the middle path, right? So
I even
Mercury,
question like the hermit with the staff too. So many of the same thing.
Oh yeah, the Hermit card is ruled by Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury. And actually, what Hermit means little Hermes.
Right.
Right.
I was going to say that when you're getting into the staff with the two serpents, it's more a method of exchange. It also relates to barter and trade, whereas the staff of Asclepius is more along the lines of healing. So with Mercury, you specifically have in the Roman period the Merkers that would actually pile up goods at crossroads, and they were worshiping Mercury because he was the god of mercantilism as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Even the flow of currency is so Mercurial.
Right.
And you look at how we print our cash here, right? Just that green. Green is the color of Mercury in so many ways. There's a lot of symbolism actually with the green man or the wild man that completely corresponds with Mercury, in my opinion, too. And like, there's a lot of like symbolism that overlaps there. And so actually I just pulled from my altar. I have some Mercury right here. It's just a little vial of Mercury or whatever, but the element of Mercury is a liquid and a metal, right? And so it's both. And so Mercury is very androgynous, right? And so that plays a huge part in just the symbolism of Mercury being, basically knowing your own light and your own dark, your feminine, your masculine, things like that. This is why I think one of the main reasons why I think magicians and mystics and things like that have a reverence for Mercury. To me, it reminds me of magnetism, having the positive and the negative end of the pole or something along these lines. And then even magnetism, M-A-G, magician, right? Magi, right? There's all these things kind of related to that. And I think kind of the magician, in a way, almost they learn how to sort of attract, and repel, right? It's like what they sort of want in their life or what they're trying to accomplish or whatever. So the magnetic sort of thing is definitely like part of Mercurial symbolism for sure.
I definitely.
And this sort of like duality thing. Go ahead.
I definitely think, like, I'm glad you brought up the magnetic thing. Even with that, I've even mentioned, when you get into the pole star and polarity, that can be all magnetic too. You can change that with magnets. I've even, I've brought up to you and I've mentioned it on the show, but even like the whole situation when I'm fucking with my pineal gland, there's something that happens where for me pushing all of a sudden equals a slap in the face, and I don't understand that.
Yeah. No, yeah, you've explained that to me before. Yeah.
Yeah. And I ended up coming across a picture of David Bowie acting like the Archer, shooting himself in the head. So I'm not the only one who obviously has thought of that.
One of the things I wanted to point out, Mario, is that you're talking about this duality. Isn't Mercury often found with Cinnabar? And so you have Mercury as this manly, warlike type, and then Cinnabar is a red vermilion type color, which I guess a scarlet woman or anything like that. So it almost reminds me of that duality.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. What has been said, in today's world, a lot of people say men are from Mars, women are from Venus. My understanding is that actually, like, that became more popular in like the 60s or 70s. There's a specific author that kind of popularized that phrase. And esoterically, what I've heard is that men are from Mercury, women are from Venus. And it's interesting when you look at the glyph of Venus and the glyph of Mercury, the only difference is horns, which kind of is sort of, there's a phallic connotation with horns. There's a feminine aspect to horn symbolism too, for sure, because it's like a chalice or a cup or something. But when you look at Venus and Mercury, just the glyphs side by side, I think that makes a lot of sense, like in so many ways, right?
There's also an ancient aspect to it too, because the cinnabar was something that the Etruscans would cover themselves with. And they think that Hermes was one of these borrowed gods from the Etruscans because, they had this relationship with the Greeks where they did share a lot of these deities. And you can see a lot of these Hermes influences in the Etruscans.
Right. Yeah. So I think the other thing too with this like duality sort of thing with Hermes Mercury is really seen in his rulership of Gemini, right? And the Gemini twins. So Mercury being the planet that rules Gemini, and then with the Gemini twins, you have the light and the dark twin, right? The dark twin always kills the good twin, not always, but occasionally kills the good twin, and then they have this sort of thing going on. So the fact that Mercury rules Gemini, I think, is really interesting. When you're looking at the traditional planets, there's two planets that rule two different signs. Mercury is one. It rules Gemini and it rules Virgo. So there's an airy aspect to Mercury, communication and this traveling and the winged cap and everything else. And then it rules Virgo, so that would be its earthy aspect, right? It's more feminine sort of aspect, which, funny enough, the other planet that basically does double duty like this is Venus. So Venus rules Taurus, has that earthy aspect, but then it also rules Libra, which would be its airy aspect. So isn't that interesting, this pair, Mercury, Venus, they both do sort of the same thing to different signs, right? So I think that's pretty fascinating too.
I do want to add just real quick because you're mentioning Mercury and Venus. For me, just the way I look at the tree and I look like I guess the way I understand Kabbalah, just whatever from my studying, I do feel like that Thoth is like the beginning of the hero's journey. My opinion, I do think like his arc goes up the tree. And even like I think when I mentioned the Hermit card, I think the Hermit card would actually be possibly in the path of going from Mercury to Venus across the tree. And I do think, like, this is just my opinion, I do think that when that happens, they both have to work together, I think, in order to go up the tree. I think it's almost like they're doing an untangling of themselves. And I do think you need the male and the female to work together. I even think when it comes down to if physiology is really involved in this stuff like I think it is, I think one is the energy and the other one is the form that it has to manipulate to go the other way instead of what it used to do. So I do think it's very important, even the feminine aspect that it has to work with, to make things happen. Totally. Again, I know that this is probably an unpopular idea, but I do think a lot of times, like again, when I say the hero's journey, is again why I'm so happy we're covering this, because I do think Mercury, again, starts off the story. I think a lot of other gods, like Horus, I would say was probably Thoth, but just at a different time in his story. You know, right. So I do think like a lot of the male gods are all still Thoth, but just at a different time in their story. Well, same thing with Venus.
Yeah, I was going to say, when you go back and you look at the Egyptian stuff linked in with the Persian stuff, there's a lot of, I mean, with Thoth, Hermes, Mercury being sort of a trickster god, he takes on the same characteristics as Osiris, the same characteristics as Nimrod. Like you see, as far as establishing writing, you know, the weights and measures, the geometry, the building of things, you almost have to think that maybe Thoth wrote himself into these different roles. I mean, you know, being there before the beginning, there's in the Virgin of the World, there's talk of Hermes being there when the soul was put into man for the first time. You just, you know, depend, but it's like almost like this one character kind of writes himself into multiple roles through the various histories.
I love that, man. That's great, because Thoth was a scribe, right?
Yeah.
So so writing himself into these different sort of things.
And also, Thoth was the secretary to Isis when Osiris left to civilize the world and teach building and the religions and the temples. And Thoth was the dark side of the moon. As the secret wisdom of Isis that was kind of behind the scenes as the moon moved through the heavens. So there's all these intrinsic kind of really esoteric kind of occult aspects of you know, Thoth, Tahuti, Mercury, Hermes, you know, from the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, one of the lesser known aspects of this Hermes Aphrodite conjunction, or this Mercury Hermaphroditus, that's the one that everybody knows, but also they had another child called Priapus.
Right.
And Priapus was a rustic god. If you're feeling really brave, you should look him up and get an eyeful there, because he had literally a baby's arm holding an apple.
Yeah.
And so this god was known as having this massive donger. And so Hermes also got associated with this massive donger. Now, this goes right back to what you were just saying about the pole of the heavens. So it's not just this idea of that, you know, he's moving between the earth and the heavens. It's that the spirit of the earth is basically raining down, creating life on this planet Earth from this northern polar symbolism. And that polar symbolism gets then transferred into this masculine idea of the masculine creating. Now, Priapus was kind of an unfortunate character, because despite always having a rock hard schlong, he couldn't use it when the time came. So it's like this idea that the spirit is weak, but the flesh is willing. So there's this kind of a contrast there, and that Priapus angle really does get transferred over into the everyday life of the average Greek, because they would have Priapus stones in their gardens, like closer to the house, and then they would have Herm stones sort of guarding or marking out the boundary between their territories. So you've got Hermes sort of further out, and then this Priapus closer to home. But one of the reasons why they had Priapus closer to home was you would rub his phallus for luck, if, you know, as the Greeks were mostly into this fertility ritual thing. And also, you could pull it out and use it as a baseball bat if the people who didn't respect your Herm stones came onto your property. So you could actually smack people around with this giant phallus. And there's nothing more, you know, humiliating than being smacked around with the giant phallus of this god. So.
Yeah, and you'll see Priapus literally holding like a caduceus, basically. Right. Yeah, I mean,
I was just going to add more onto the phallic symbolism that Thoth represents with his beak, with the ibis beak, right?
Exactly.
Of course, that's very phallic, and it's also which is phallic, pointing out things, which is another author kind of trait in more modern times. The idea of Shakespeare, right? He kind of shake the spear. Hey, I'm the author, and writing. Thoth being kind of the writer is kind of pierces the veil, pierces the realms, transverses the different dimensions, as does the beak, right? I think the idea of when the ibis or any bird hunts into the water, it goes into that other strata, right? So maybe that's part of the symbolism of him being able to move among dimensions.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I'm inclined to think so, for sure.
Something.
Speaking of which, and just the phallic thing, real quick, and this going to other dimensions or going to the underworld or what have you. This idea of energy ascending, going up the world tree, going up the world axis, whatever. Which, by the way, there's a huge thing with Mercury Hermes with spin too. I've seen multiple statues where he's with like a wheel or a gear or something along these lines. Even I've seen examples of like the spin of the earth kind of being related to Mercury. And my personal opinion is earth is not spinning, the heavens are spinning. I think that's been a huge inversion over time, basically. And so that's kind of my position personally. But the phallus, even literally ejaculation into a woman, to me, that's symbolic of the exact same thing. It's almost like your semen is going to the underworld. It's going to another dimension, basically. It's another sort of classic sort of example of what I'm trying to explain here. So I think that's related as well.
And the exchange is the creation process that is manifesting and bringing forth some sort of form out of the meeting of those two spinning serpents.
Right. Yeah, no,
that's
exactly.
really reflected in some of the early dirty poetry about him. What they're really trying to say there is that this exchange of life, this creation of life, has a lot to do with this conjunction of Mercury and Aphrodite. The idea that you're transversing, the only way to continue life is to transverse boundaries.
Right.
That is so closely related. So when they're talking about Congress in places like Washington, that's sexual Congress on a different level. And what they're hoping for is that they're transversing these boundaries so that you don't have to go to war. Obviously, it doesn't happen that way. But another interesting angle is the caduceus itself was sort of granted to Hermes, or they call him the angel of Zeus, because being a messenger, he was now untouchable. So the ancient messengers, or these figures, they were on battlefields, right? And they were untouchable because they had these batons that had these ribbons from them. So everybody on the battlefield would see that the messenger of the king would have this baton with ribbons on them, and Hermes too. Originally, before it was the snakes, he had the baton with the two white. Again, white, what are they symbolizing there? The two white streamers coming down from it. So this was like, everybody knew not to touch these guys. So you have to wonder, were these battles really all that, all out there?
Battly.
If there were people on the battlefield walking around kind of like at this LARP, being the judges judging your hits on each other, I mean, there's that angle to it. It's like maybe war has never been authentic. Maybe it's always been sort of this coached and kind of a sport type thing,
I've heard it described as ritualistic.
I can see that, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Something I did want to add before we go any farther, and I guess like the phallic stuff, I figured was a way for me to segue into this because it was something I wanted to get into. I just didn't know how I was going to get into it. When it comes to Mercury, even angels, certain things, I have been wondering, about like them playing a role in physiology or in the body. And I guess like in order to maybe preface, and I'll have to get through it real quick, why I even think this way, just from certain experiences in the OTO during initiations. there's a point where I do believe I'm being showed the optic nerve in the Minerval, and I'm standing in front of something and I'm being told the word on. My thumb's being pumped 12 times, and your optic nerve is one of your 12 cranial nerves. So just in my opinion, that's what I do think I'm seeing. So I do think I'm seeing like nerves, technically. Then in Aleister Crowley's NOx formula, you will be grabbing your nipple as if a baby is sucking it. And there is something going on through nerves, through the body to the mother's pineal gland, and then affects the child. So again, you're seeing nerves. I started thinking, well, that's how messages travel within inside your body. And all these guys are always called messengers, and you're sending messages throughout all these things. And your dick does have nerves. You know what I'm saying? Plenty of them. And nerves are also very important for healing. And some of these gods that are associated with Mercury have healing aspects to them. So I'm just wondering, is it something actually with how they travel? I joke around saying ride the lightning, but maybe you got to ride it all the way out of your body through your nerves and out your head.
To your point of the nerves in the penis, it also connects all the way to the S1, S4, TH1, L1 of the spinal column. So it goes all the way back to the spinal column. It's connected.
Oh, shit.
Even a spine is an anagram for penis.
Yes. Yes.
So
and hence we have the pen.
God, that's like the Libra sign right there.
There you go.
And I believe in Egyptian culture, they would often have people and gods, and especially Tahuti, have the left foot forward, right? Not only him crossing dimensions, but it was the way that we would appropriate ourselves most like the sun, most like enlightenment. And I believe that can be kind of, the root of the classic Freemason question, that there's probably many more than this one, but the idea of, so you're a traveling man. And the code is supposed to be, yeah, I'm a traveling man. I'm heading east. Oh, good. And so that's the same idea that you're directing yourself, as the Egyptians noted, left foot direction, that in relation to the Nile was east. And of maybe interest in Tai Chi and so forth, and Qigong, everything is left side first, left foot first. An interesting correspondence.
That's awesome, dude. I love that for so many different reasons. And this is what I'll say is that I'm always thinking about rotation and spin and these circumambulation rituals, and whether the totem is on the right or on the left makes a big difference with what you're trying to do, right? And so if the totem is on the right, that's more expansive. People have said that this is more solar in nature. If the totem is on the left and you're going counterclockwise, that's actually more polar. It's going more within. And so there's something to be said about, like in Islam, when you go to Mecca and you go around the Kaaba cube is on the left-hand side, you're going counterclockwise. Right. All of the fixed stars go counterclockwise around Polaris, right?
And,
so it's
and the
more
Buddhists,
sort of thing.
Sorry, to build on your point, the Buddhists circumambulate their structures. I forget what they're called right now, not lingams, but when they circumambulate their grain structures and celebration of life, I forget what they're called, excuse me, but they do a clockwise circulation, which is the opposite of the rotation of Islam. And the Taoists say the same thing about those rotations being clockwise, being expansive, counterclockwise being internal and condensing kind of thing.
There you go. Yeah. And then I don't know if you've come across this or whatever, but basically I'm inclined to think that east, the direction of east, is actually a metaphor, that it's actually beyond the east. And I think that when people refer to the quest of the Orient, that it's actually not literally an eastward sort of journey, and it's not something that you can actually point at on the map, but it's actually, there's been many ways it's been described, but it's actually more of a central sort of location. It's like a mythical central sort of location, like a sacred center sort of idea. So in that way, I think of the center as like the pole, right? Like the North Pole, the pole star. That's kind of like, how I tend to interpret things. And so I've heard that like when East is referenced in some texts, they're not literally mean geographical East. And I think that's kind of interesting too, because in some Freemasonic tracing boards, there's a clear ladder to the stairway, or there's a clear stairway to heaven to like the pole star, in my opinion. And oftentimes that is what's labeled East, right? So kind of like this mythical sort of other dimensional centralized kind of polar sort of thing with how I tend to look at things. Which that's kind of another thing with Mercury, I'll say, is that there's a triune nature to Mercury, right? So it's almost like the one reflects upon itself, is aware of itself, which creates two, and then the two creates a three sort of thing. There's this natural unfolding, right? And so whenever there's two of anything, there's a third thing. So with the Gemini twins, you have the twins, but there's a third thing that's created now. There's like a passageway or like an opening or a doorway, just like the pillars, right? And so Mercury
between two mirrors.
Right. Yeah. Totally.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit right behind you. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, totally. There's a triune trinity thing. Whenever there's two of anything, there's always this hidden third. And so how I break it down and decode it is that Mercury has symbolism, undeniable symbolism that is solar in nature, undeniable symbolism that is lunar in nature, and undeniable symbolism that is polar in nature. That's the third thing. Lunar, solar, and polar. You know, that's how I even look at the three pillars on the Kabbalistic tree of life, you know. And so so I think polar is the most primordial, though. And again, it relates to the pole, the pillar, the phallus, this central sort of idea, the world axis, you know, all this kind of stuff. So there's like a whole entire breakdown that you can look at the polar, lunar, and solar symbolism of Mercury, and it's all completely baked into all of these different mercurial figures and stuff like that.
I have something in regard to what you're saying there. When you get into alchemy and Paracelsus, he has a whole treatise on pulling mercury from every type of metal. And he tells you how to lay it out into these flat forms, put it in vinegar, purify it. And nonetheless, he says the spirit of Mercury, which is only subjected to the spirits above, has no determination or certain form itself. Hence, it happens that it admits every metal, just as wax receives all seals of whatever form. But it goes on to just basically say that, you know, within Sol, there's Mercury. Within Luna, there's Mercury. Within all of... So Mercury is the fixative and the flux of all the different, and you can pull mercury and put it into all of the various metals. So very much along the lines of exactly what you were saying there.
Well, when mining metals from out of the ground, what you'll find is that it's usually coated in other less pure metals. So you've got lead and you've got mercury that's usually in amalgam form that's around things like copper and, you know, big iron ore deposits and things like that. You've got all these things that are basically surrounded by mercury. And you don't get a lot out of the mercury that surrounds it. But, you know, if you're mining enough metal, you can get a lot. So.
Interesting. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, man. That's great. Makes a lot of sense. One of the things I was going to add on to what Nick was saying about the hero's journey being mercurial in nature, basically, essentially, right? Dude, I can't tell you. I went to film school. So, I mean, for what it's worth, it was just a rinky-dink film school in Portland. But, you know, I'm always decoding when I'm watching stuff. I'm sure just like all of you guys and whatever. But ever since I really got into mercurial symbolism, man, almost every single protagonist, maybe all of them, I have the exact same opinion, dude, where I'm like, this is freaking Mercury. If there's any planetary correspondence here or whatever, I'm like, this is Mercury. So I think that's actually the hidden correspondence, essentially, with protagonists, is that it is actually Mercury. Because what we want to see, the hero's journey is about change. Being mercurial, right? Traveling, you know, and going through this journey, you know, whatever it might be. So there's some movies, though, that really, really are highly aware of this dynamic, in my opinion. And just because it's a classic movie that like everyone is familiar with, and it does a pretty good job doing it esoterically, The Matrix, you know, Neo is basically a mercurial figure.
Yeah. He's riding the chariot when he's got those twins chasing him.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. There's some chariot cards, by the way, that I have. One in particular by this creator. Her name's Barbara Walker. She's actually a really great symbologist. She has a few really awesome symbology books, and she did her own deck. So she is like really schooled on mythology and things like that. She put the glyph of Mercury on the front of the chariot, in the chariot card, which is ruled by Cancer, but she knows the symbolism. So she put Mercury right there, and I'm like, that is really awesome. But at the end of the movie, Neo, and there's so much green in the movie too, right? The color of Mercury, the heart chakra, right? The color of nature, right? And so at the very end of the movie, he's in a phone booth. He does like the final call or whatever. He walks outside. He's at an intersection, aka the crossroads, right? Mercury has a lot of symbolism related to crossroad symbolism. The crossroad is the point of like ascension, and it's a transcendental sort of thing, right? I almost think if you look at a cross, literally, you have the 4 quadrants or the 4 arms. So the number 4 relates to the cross, but that center point where the vertical and horizontal meet, that is the 5th point. So that's like the transcendental point. I'm kind of inclined to think that the cross, when you see them in graveyards and stuff like that, symbolically, there is a thing about people crossing over, right, with this cross. And Neo walks out of the phone booth at the crossroads, and then that's the first time you see him fly, basically, right? He like literally just takes off like Superman or whatever. And so to me, I'm just like, that is all basically encoding some of the things we're kind of talking about, right?
I hear what you're saying. That's wild.
In your transcendental with Mercury, isn't it, and Jen, help me out, I think isn't the first emperor of China buried over a river of Mercury? I do know that with the feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, the temple itself has a large deposit of Mercury in it. And so when you were talking about crossing over or having this transcendental moment, it reminded me of those two things.
Okay, I was going to mention when you mentioned the red herb, the Chinese were both, what was it, Lisa, that you were?
Well, Jen, go. I think, Jen, was it the first?
Cinnabar, yes, yeah. The Chinese were obsessed with cinnabar and Mercury. In not only internally, but I think ceremonially as well. Sorry about that, Mario.
No, you're good.
Oh yeah, so I'll just add really quick, like cinnabar is still really popularly used in TCM for skin formulations, and it is considered to be herb of Mars in particular, but there's an interesting element, and I wanted to bring this up later when Nick had my slides, but I'll just mention it now, is the thing about Quicksilver and Mercury mixed together. It's actually a treatment for nerves. Like Lisa, you brought up the thing about the in the penis is connected to the spine. Well, there's even an idea in Tantra there that the tip is green, like bringing up the screen, because most people don't associate green with Mercury all the time. Even in Kabbalah, like if you look at a hermetic tree, it's often orange, but really in Tantra, it's green. So it's emerald green. It's green with light passing through. So this is the really important distinction from like Venus or Netzach. That's like a jade color or a copper color that's been oxidized. But to bring it back to the Quicksilver and Cinnabar, it is said that Quicksilver actually dissolves the Cinnabar to make it less toxic. So when you are using in a formula, it kind of corrodes, just like it corrodes copper. So it has the element to, like Robby was saying, the flux. It is the flux that kind of corrodes both cinnabar and copper at the same time. So it's used in nerve formulas when it is treated or processed in that specific way. But often for scorpion bites, cinnabar, and any kind of raised boils. I know we brought up the scorpion thing last time, but I have so much more notes, but I'll wait. I'll wait till until you're done, Margo. Sorry.
Oh, you're good, man. This is awesome.
That patina color is just so perfect as the example of Mercury, because it's the metal, and it's also what combines with Venus or copper. Right. So it's got that. It's got all the symbols right in there.
Well, copper as it patinas, it turns that green.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. And Jin, I'm glad you mentioned emeralds. Absolutely. And I'm inclined to think that this is somewhat part of the inspiration for Emerald City, where in the Wizard of Oz, right? And so Emerald City, apparently when you read the source material, the books, it's known that Emerald City is in the middle of Oz. So they're actually going to the center of Oz, essentially, the sacred center, right? And then that's where the wizard is, right? And so wizardry, magic, you know, all these different types of things heavily related to Mercury, for sure.
I was going to say about the Mercury under the ground. So at Teotihuacan, they found a scale model of Teotihuacan under the ground in front of the Temple of the Sun. And that scale model had this river of Mercury flowing through it somehow. And what's interesting about both Teotihuacan and the sites in China with these underground Mercury rivers is that it's like there's constant sightings around these areas of UFOs, but never over the areas. So if you want to keep the aliens away from you, you need a subterranean river of Mercury, and then you're good.
Well, I've even heard that they took Mercury and filled up pools so that they could stand on top of the pyramids and look down to observe the stars. So, you know, there's Mercury, we could go for days and days and days.
Absolutely. You know? Some people say that it's either Mercury or red Mercury, which is a whole nother rabbit hole too. That's sort of the secret for like levitation and for creating UFOs and things like that.
And it was the Pyramid of the Vulture that they found a chamber of red mercury in South America. So yeah.
Nice. That's awesome. Maybe, dude, you can share a couple of my slides because there's a few points that I think looking at some of this artwork visually would be helpful. So I'm thinking of number 5 and then also number 8. But there's other things too that I think will kind of, take the conversation where it needs to go.
Here we go.
But basically, you know, when you look at some mercurial figures, what I've noticed is that, and you guys can help me out with the right terminology here, they're either the synthesis of the masculine and the feminine, or they operate outside of the feminine and the masculine, something along these lines. But I think that this is a good example of that, where you have a clear mercurial figure in the middle, right? His phallus is out in the open. He has Mercury on top of his head. He has 2 caduceuses in his hands. And then you have a figure on the left, more emblematic of the sun, because the sun is on the left-hand side. He has a club. And then on the right, a figure that's more emblematic of the moon, because the moon is on the right-hand side. And what I'm inclined to think is that a lot of teachers from the ancient world are associated with Mercury, basically. And this relates to the wild man, green man sort of thing, that their wisdom comes from a previous age. And I'm inclined to think that this is polar in nature. So once again, solar symbolism on the left, lunar symbolism on the right, polar symbolism in the middle. That polar symbolism is more primordial. Right. And so I think that this is what you see again in the tarot, where the fool is always carrying a pole with him. That's not a mistake. A lot of green men or a lot of wild man sort of figures, they're always with a staff or they're always with a pole. This relates to that tradition, which is also referred to as the mystic pole tradition, basically. Right. And so I'm inclined to think that Mercury's origins basically are with all of this polar sort of stuff. But if you didn't know about any of that symbolism, I think it'd be kind of harder to pick up. And I think that if you go to the 8th slide, number 8, you'll see Hermes Trismegistus. And basically, it's a different sort of layout, but I think it's communicating some of the same symbolism in that you have... he's operating outside almost of the lunar solar paradigm or something along these lines, right? He predates it. And so you have the sun on the top and then you have the moon on the bottom, and he's operating outside of that. And he's holding what? He's holding a pole, right? And so that pole has a sphere on it. And to me, this is like a clear sort of acknowledgement of the world axis, sort of this symbolic bridge to other planes, the North Pole or whatever you want to say. But Hermes Trismegistus, his wisdom, their wisdom, Mercurial figures, you know, they know things that modern people don't know. So I think sometimes, like in the last slide that we just looked at, solar lunar people are trying to basically, you know, hurt Mercury because he comes from a previous age. It's almost symbolically kind of showing the passage of time in a way, you know, that the Mercurial wisdom is something that is ancient, so much so that I think that modern people have a hard time either respecting it or understanding it or something along these lines. But what do you guys think about this?
So
if I may, please go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, so when you go back to the pre-Diluvian stories of the original the two pillars that were set up, one was brick and one was lattice. One of those pillars was said to be established by Hermes as a pre-Diluvian Hermes. And then it was a post-Diluvian, a different Hermes in the same line that basically found that and deciphered it and as Thoth and gave it to the priests and basically was seen in high regard. So there is this sense of a post-Diluvian or pre-Diluvian, post-Diluvian kind of information system that carries through from and getting into the pole star and the changing of the pole star, potential Earth changes, etc., etc.
Gotcha.
I was that's amazing. I was going to add that the you have the polarity of the sun and the moon, which harken back to your concept of the pillars, and then the third, who's kind of, you know, in concert with the two polarity systems there, and also that trinity that beckons to the Trice Great, and I believe that kind of in regards to surpassing, it's also the sense of mastering these three worlds of high, middle, low, or heaven, earth, and man, and sometimes referred to or could be demonstrated as the priestly, the king, and the philosopher. Many times it's been regarded that way, but you could also think of it as mastering psyche or politics, and politics, so the political state systems and the nature of a high place. So there's those trinities are right there, and I feel like, to your point of the crossroads too. In Egyptian concept of life and death, which of course they're obsessed with, there's the two main worlds, maybe in that crossroads idea of the living and the dead, and there's also the realm of the gods, and they weren't really. It wasn't easy for them to just come to Earth, like, except for Hermes and Thoth rather, and there was also the fourth dimension in that, where sometimes if a person was exceptional, Thoth, of course, there was a way to kind of visit the godly realm for a mortal, but normally it was those main three, and then this other one that was like exceptional, an exception. Thanks for letting me say that.
Thank you.
Well, what stands out to me is the auras around the sun and the moon there. So you've got that kind of X shape between the two, and around the sun you get the rays coming off of the sun, but then outside of that it sort of seems like you've got this implosion force, right? So to me, what that's sort of indicating is some kind of an ether, right? So there's an etheric connection between both the sun and the moon, and the way that they're depicting them, like right over top of each other, indicates, I think, a kind of maybe a conjunction, maybe talking about the eclipse, having that kind of like moving into that eclipse, you get a different change in the energy, the ether around them.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I can see the separation of it.
When it comes to rays, one of the things I picked up symbolically, I just think it's interesting. And when I see stuff like this now, I definitely take it into account. But when you see the ray of a sun and it's wavy, I've heard symbolically that's more indicative of heat. And when you see it and it's straight out like spokes on a wheel, that's more indicative of light. And so there's like probably both of that going on here, it seems like, right? The big fat sort of wavy rays, and then the straight ones behind it.
In some of the ancient plates, you see exactly that, the wavy and the straight, and that's indicative of them trying to emulate that it was both heat and light.
Gotcha, yeah.
It's something I have wondered about, and I don't know if this plays into anything with occult symbolism or Mercury, but I mean, I do find it interesting. I mean, if you just think as simple as a thermometer. I mean, if you add heat to it, it's gonna like move. Yeah. I mean, technically, is it defying gravity? I don't know if whatever that is, gravity. But I mean, you add heat to it, it's gonna move in a different direction that it's at.
Well, I think it's just expanding.
Or something. I don't.
Yeah.
Well, what he's also showing, though, is that as he's pointing downward, you've got the as above, so below. But he's putting the pole above, or as a more spiritual concept than the lower concept of both the sun and the moon. So he's sort of saying this is a reflection of somehow the polar symbolism in his.
So maybe you guys can help me out here. Is this a correct statement? Polarity precedes duality?
I would say so, yeah. Because condensation would cause the polarity to then form the duality, because as they've sort of separated, then you've got the two masses now being in contrast to one another.
I didn't see it before, but as you're speaking of the polarity, there's in the two worlds of the sun and the moon, there's that 8, or there's essentially an 8 in that fiery formation there between.
Oh, that's excellent, man. Yeah. So Mercury's cycle is 88 days for one complete rotation, right? The fastest planet. So that actually makes it very tricky to see in the night sky. So you actually have to go out of your way to see Mercury, essentially.
Can I interject real quick? Nick, can we go back to the previous slide?
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, you're good. Micah probably wants to move on, but I was like, I want to say something.
Oh, no, you're good.
So this image right here reminds me of something that Nick and I had discussed. So we were talking about retrograde and how the concept of retrograde is that Mercury appears as it's going backwards. And so to me, immediately, I think Mercury going forwards, Mercury going backwards. And you can only see Mercury retrograde or Mercury going backwards if you are on planet Earth, so to speak. And that it is the way that it circles around the sun itself to where, you're going whatever faster than Mercury at some point, and then it looks like Mercury is going backwards. Kind of like with a car, when you pass up a car, and the car kind of looks like it's going backwards, but it's not. It's just the way the optical illusion is. And so with Hermes is such a dual, right? There's a duality to him. And so you have the duality again, sun and moon, and then you have the earth. To me, that indicates somewhat of maybe they could see the retrograde back then and that they were trying to depict something like that. But that's what that reminds me of.
Well, gotcha. The 88-day cycle too, that brings to mind the 88 keys of a piano. And what Hermes is known for is being the teacher of music to Apollo. Right. And so that teacher of music angle is firmly fixed in the idea of the piano and the cycle of Hermes or Mercury.
Excellent, man. Yeah, exactly right. So what I've learned is that some teachers that are associated with this solar dynamic, their teacher was more polar and their teacher was more mercurial, basically, right? And so like St. John the Baptist, as an example, like he's a clear wild man sort of figure, which relates him to the green man too. And he's always carrying a staff or a really long crucifix, basically. And so to me, there's mercurial sort of signatures all over him and his storyline all day long. And then he's, he taught Jesus and stuff like that. If Jesus belonged to like a sect or a school, my understanding is that it would be of St. John the Baptist. So that's just kind of like another sort of, example there. But yeah, so who brought this one up? This image.
This is Heinrich Kuhnratz, one of his things that he's got going on over here. And one thing that I did find this interesting. Well, I mean, Lisa, if you want, I mean, it's your, I think.
No, I mean, just when we were doing Kunroth, we were looking, and I believe this is called the Androgyny. Please correct me if I'm wrong. And it's the atom androgyny. And if you focus in on the actual humanoid that is depicted here, you'll see that the arms have exactly the same writing as Baphomet does, the Solve and Coagula, right? And when we stumbled upon it, there you go, perfect. When we stumbled upon it, immediately I thought of the Baphomet, right? I was like, what are the odds? Maybe I don't remember it correctly. So we went and we looked, and sure enough, Levi basically cites that his Baphomet illustration was inspired and a direct, I guess, nod to Kunroth's atom androgyny. But one of the interesting things is, so if you look at this humanoid that Kunroth is depicting, you clearly see a distinction in faces, like female, male. You see a distinction in breast or pectoralis, and you see a distinction in the arms. One is more muscular, one is a little bit more feminine. And then if you look at the abdomen, the same thing. It's not as pronounced with the rib cage kind of coming out with the more masculine one, and then having that cut into the waist with the feminine. And so if you look at the Baphomet, you do see clear distinctions in pectoralis as well as the arms corresponding to each. And then you see that kind of cut in more so on the Eliphas Levi depiction, where it shows that that side is a little bit more feminine than the other one. So it was just something that we thought to mention.
Oh, no. Yeah, that's completely relevant. I actually included Baphomet, the Eliphas Levi illustration, in the slides there. So if you wanted to go to the 10th slide, that's what we'll see. And when you look at the phallus of Baphomet, the symbolic phallus, right? I mean, it's a caduceus. And so a lot of the symbolism, this androgynous nature and everything, completely relevant. And to me personally, when I look at that in his lap, I mean, I once again see kind of a world axis symbol, and then that arc just reminds me of firmament symbolism, you know, so that's how I kind of perceive it.
Well, that Kunroth plate looks so similar to the art card from Crowley's tarot.
Yeah.
So
exactly. And actually that makes perfect sense too. The art card has a lot to do with alchemy, specifically what I've heard, Azoth alchemy. And on top of the two heads there, you can see in that bird, in the body of the bird, it says Azoth right there.
Yeah. Yep. And it's the Azoth for sure. You know, the whole, if you look at it closer, is that Azoth is formed from the Latin A and Z, but it also is a nod to the Greek A, alpha, and then the omega as well. And then there's symbolism in there with Hebrew. You have the Aleph and the Tau. So he was constantly doing this, you know, Trinity type symbolism all throughout with that. And then I think on the O, you have the sun symbol in the center where it says Azoth. The O itself is the sun symbol. So you have, you know, a nod to the sun, gold, or sun is the sun. So
right,
and then it's Adam, so the sun is the sun.
Excellent. Yeah. No, I was definitely going to bring up Baphomet for sure because it really
sorry, I got ahead of it.
Relevant. Oh no, definitely. I'm going all over the place, so I don't have like a set structure or anything like that.
Mercury is all over the place.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, exactly. Right.
One thing I do want to add before we go forward, if anybody would like to be able to look at this image more, go check out occultresearchinstitute.org. This is on there. There you go.
Shameless
so just because, yeah, there you go.
Shameless plug. Anything you look at online for the atom androgyny is not clear at all, but Nick went and took pictures of this at the library, and that's the one we used for our episode because it was the clearest one on the internet. So
nice.
Yeah. If you go check out this guy's book on this website, you're not going to see as much detail as you do anywhere else because I went in on multiple shots. Yeah.
So this image here, these two figures, you know, what it's reminding me of too is just how hybrids are associated with Mercurial symbolism as well, right? So like mermaid, you know, and I even have a card here where you see like a mermaid type figure. If you want to go to slide 003, in the lower left, you'll see a mermaid, but the mer and Mercury are completely related to each other. And so even Sagittarius, half human, half horse, the centaur, there's so much symbolism with Sagittarius that I see as being very mercurial. In fact, the glyph of Sagittarius is an arrow, right, for archery. And Crowley in the Book of Thoth, right, his deck is also called the Thoth deck. He says that the arrow is the simplest glyph of Mercury, that it represents Mercury. And so he says that literally the arrow of Sagittarius is mercurial in nature. So you see down in the lower left, little mermaid sort of figure there.
See,
so
even
kind
in
of
that
hybrid creatures relate to Mercury in some way.
Even in that thinking, I would even say now, I would say that the archer is still Thoth.
Yeah, dude, for sure, man. Yeah. I mean, I see that. Absolutely. I mean, what is the arrow? The arrow is another phallic, in my opinion, phallic sort of world axis symbol, and it travels, right? And so it's a traveler.
Also, I was going to say, you brought up the myrrh. There are some of the ancient texts coming out of like Ireland and around in that area where they talk about the myrrh were the ones who built the stone circles.
Ah, excellent. Yeah. That reminds me too of one thing I wanted to talk about, the etymology of Mercury. Just a little thing I personally pay attention to. I fully acknowledge this is more of my individual weave or whatever. So if other people don't find it that interesting, I totally get it. But I'm always interested in words that begin with or contain And when you look at there's like civilizations named there's games called there's even groups that have called themselves like something along these lines. And when you look at it means like original or primordial or something along these lines, like very, very ancient, like the beginning of a thing. And so I first got on this tip because of Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, two northern constellations, right, that circumambulate the pole star. And I just think it's interesting that in Mercury, you have two Mercury, right? So it's like almost like this double origin sort of dynamic with it or something along these lines.
Well, and if you're connecting the pole star to the Earth and those two symbols spinning circularly around the pole, I mean, that could essentially be the pole with the serpents.
No, exactly. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and Draco's up there too in the north. Right. So when Draco is going around the pole star, I kind of see similar symbolism. And then you said Earth, right? There's another example. So once you start paying attention to it, it really is all over the place. Maybe if you want to just go to number 2, the slide number 2, it's the Crowley version of the Magician card. And I just wanted to point out basically that very obvious pole behind him, which I think is, related to the world axis and everything else, which seemingly he's levitating up it. It's almost like he's like kind of levitating, going and through this ascension sort of journey or whatever. And he was astute enough too to do the one-legged or one-footed sort of thing with his foot there. And when I see one-legged symbolism or symbolism like this, where someone's standing on a foot or they're acknowledging like their tippy toes, not unlike a ballerina, I always think of spin. And there's a lot of myths that point out the one leg. And to me, it's just another world axis symbol. So the fact that he's in front of that pole, this is the first card. Again, just even literally the number 1, how we draw the number 1 with just a straight vertical line. It's the same axis, in my opinion. But one-legged symbolism implies axial symbolism. Again, kind of like a ballerina or something. Or one leg, it's almost like there's deities that have had one leg, or the one leg gets chopped off or something along these lines. To me, it's just like a pole, pretty much. Instead of having 2 legs, you have the one leg, or at least you're alluding to it. And I think that that's kind of what he's alluding to here in some way. But yeah, if other people want to share some slides, they're more than welcome to. Jin, I know you have a couple things you want to share, right?
Sure. So, yeah, thanks, guys. Nick, if you want to bring mine up, I'd appreciate that.
Which one?
The second one first. Thank you.
All right. I think this will be the second one. Is that correct?
That's the first one, but why don't I just do that?
All right. Sorry.
I'll do this. No, don't worry. Don't be sorry. So this is Ganesh. Obviously, everybody's familiar with Ganesh, but he is a mercurial figure because he is the begotten son of what we would say is like Venus or Netzach. So she creates him out of her turmeric powder that she wears on her skin, and as well as semen from Shiva. So the quicksilver, that's how it's often described in Tantras, is the quicksilver. And she puts it in like a little clay figure or a flower figure. So he's completely, he's not created through intercourse, right? So, but he is of Shiva and of her, but he's more of her. So but he doesn't clear Mercury in Vedic astrology. So this is a common misconception, is that Ganesh will be prayed to clear the astrological conditions that are negative in Mercury. He actually clears Ketu. So it's something that even, Mario brought up, and I even texted this to Nick the other day. I also believe that Hod or Mercury has a triune expression. I believe it's the princess, the prince, and the dragon. But Ketu, the subtle body, the smoky body, it contains potential, but it's not aggregated. So you could say that Ganapati, who is the Lord of Hosts, Ganas means hosts, he is the one who creates klipas or creates skandhas or creates like aggregation. He creates the paths, the physical paths, and he also creates obstacles in front of it. But then he can also disaggregate the obstacles. So it's kind of like how Lisa was saying, only when you're on Earth can you see the retrograde of Mercury. Well, Mercury in retrograde would really be understood in a Jyotish way as being Ketu, as being that southern node of the dragon. So you're seeing it turn, and then that's what he affixes in astrology. He kind of is that curve that like his trunk is curved. And it's also interesting because he has both the up and down mudras, just like a kind of a Baphomet figure. And he's also depicted as riding his Vahana is a rat. Well, obviously Nick is fond of this, but the rats and the stars, those are the same thing.
Yes.
And then you can also say that he is atomized, like he's very small because rats are small. So he, in and of himself, just like Lisa was also alluding to, he is the kingdom in and of himself because he's all the parts come together. He's imperfect because he's not also of the Father. So I just think that that's really interesting. He's the god of outer wisdom. This is a more tantric idea. This is not a more normative Hindu idea. But he's the god of outer wisdom or outer knowledge even. So what he teaches is kind of worldly building. That's what he's often given a compass and a globe. So obviously there's a kind of a reference there for the prince who squares the circle, we could say. But I think that the next figure is much more interesting. Nick, if you don't mind bringing up my second one.
Yeah, sure.
Can I hop in there real quick? So the first king of Athens was said to be Erichthonius, who was the product of the god of the forge and Athena. He couldn't help himself. He was chasing her around because, she didn't want to get with him, but, he was kind of deformed. But he spewed his load on her, and it hit her leg and then fell on the ground. And then Erichthonius, which was a snake-legged sort of a demigod, was emerged, and she took pity on the snake-legged demigod and took him in, raised him, and he became the first king of Athens. So I think there's a huge linkage right there between the two of them. And this god of the forge, Hephaestus, his daughter is named Techne. And just like you were saying about the outer knowledge, you have that idea of Techne being the ability to create technology or outer wisdom.
Well, that's interesting because the daughter, who is right here, so she is the daughter, she is the Dakini expression of the greater mother. This is how it's understood in Srividya. So she is the full expression, you could say, of Hod or Mercury. That is, she's not androgynous, but she has a solitary hero. She's an Eka Vira. And like something Mario said that was very interesting was the feet. Well, as you can see, she's standing on the foot. And so that would maybe, perhaps, match her to Netzach. But then you could also say, if you're doing a special kind of visualization where you kind of dance with the Dakini, then those legs become your legs. So she can also stand on Hod. It's kind of interesting. And obviously she wields a bow and arrow. And her arrow is a 5-tipped, it's often a lotus, but sometimes it's a marshmallow flower, or it could be a wild rose as well. And she also holds a goad. The goad is especially interesting because that's also associated with Hod and also Gevurah. So it's kind of like, and it's an elephant's goad. So like her, you could say her brother, Ganapati. But it also clears the dragon. But unlike her brother, she actually doesn't clear Ketu, the smoky tail. She actually stands on it's called the demoness, the Mara of desire. But there's a kind of other way you can understand it where she's standing on Rahu, so the dragon, who eclipses the moon. So you could also say that it's the inherent connection that Hod and Yesod, or Mercury and the moon have, because those have an inherent sort of connection of rectification of the paths, like it happens at Yesod. So there's something really interesting there. But she doesn't just stay at the moon. She actually sort of goes up, and her name is Kurakula, so you can hear there's like a double K. And there's also an interesting Kabbalistic association with her name in Tibetan, which is Rijama, which is love as the cause of knowledge. Well, there's also the 22nd path on the Kabbalistic tree, which is Gevurah to Tiferet. That is also associated with Lamed Mem Dalet, which means love is the cause of knowledge. I find that very interesting myself. And so you have this kind of daughter who's dancing in the heatless fire. That's how it's described. And she kind of rectifies then the sun with her arrow, which is said to treat all poisons. But then you can also understand this in a secret way, where she is the rectification of Quicksilver. So I know this was a little bit back when you guys first started, but that's what her primary function is in Tibetan medical tantras, is to rectify this naturally occurring Quicksilver for medicinal use. So there's actually 3 distinct ways to purify mercury. One is the natural method, where you let the mercury drip through 7 stages of earth. Another method is the alchemical method with like an iambic, and you sort of process the mercury in 7 stages. And then the third way is a mantric, or a alchemical magical way, where you recite Dharani sutras and different spells and different visualizations over the mercury, and then, which is also 7 stages. And then there's a way that you can combine all 3 stages into one. So it is sort of, I think Mario brought this up, this kind of rectification of the 3 in the 1, which is a very interesting and also corresponding idea in Christian Kabbalah. So, and the green, she has blue-green eyes. This is really important because her eyes could be said to be a reflection of Hesed, or Jupiter, because Hod, the heart of Hod, is really the expression of mercy greater. So it's like, I think Nick was saying, it's like the arrow shoots and it kind of like bounces off the ocean, because you have to think of the arrow as like a particle of light, almost like a flower, like a quicksilver flower of quicksilver, if you're using alchemical terms. So it's sort of like a firework that explodes over the ocean, bounces back through, and then moves up the tree like a zigzag. So you could also think of it like that. I think that's kind of interesting. And then, sorry guys, I do have notes.
Something I wanted to add just real quick with, like, the heatless fire and fire and this and that. If I was to light a candle in this room and turn off all the lights and went all the way to the other end, the light coming off of it wouldn't hurt. But as soon as I get closer to it, that shit's going to burn.
That's
I
right.
mean, it really is kind of projective, maybe off the heat anyway.
And
just
I mean, just a general perspective, it looks like she's dancing in the patina of copper. You know, you've got all that orange, and then she's got the green coming around her. It's really got that kind of middle ground of patina and copper still. You know,
Right.
Well, there's something interesting about that, Headless, is that so the fire around her is heatless. It's called pristine wisdom fire. And then she stands upon the lotus, and then you see she has two dakinis at her feet. So if you almost put her at Yesod on the tree, you could think of it like that. So then there's Hod and Netzach beneath her. So she's rectifying the two paths beneath her. Does that make sense?
Oxidation can be said to be heatless fire.
Well, that's right. And so Quicksilver, obviously, as we said, oxidizes copper. So there is that element of the greening of copper that happens at Netzach, right? And then she's also wielding the emerald fire in her eyes, if you think of it like having green eyes, but the fire is reflected in your eyes. But it's also an expression of the higher sphere of mercy, or the ocean. It's like almost the reflection of the blue-green ocean, and you're looking at it, you're perceiving it. And so she has the mind of the father. That's what's really interesting to me. But she's also the rectification of the mother, because she's a virgin. So to bring up the thing about Virgo, I think that's also really interesting. I think that's all I have. Sorry, Nick.
I interrupted you. This even like kind of, it's a stretch, but reminds me of Empedocles talking about Aphrodite dancing as a flame in the back of our eyeball.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, she's the Dakini of love, right? Oh, that's the other thing, magnetization. So she's a red Dakini in the Padma or Lotus family. Her primary function is magnetization. Now, what does this mean? This means personal power. This means attracting things to you, attracting people to you. But it's not because it's Buddhist magic, rather than like sorcery. Or you could say it's Buddhist sorcery, maybe. Is that the idea is it's desireless desire, to go with like the idea of the heatless fire. It's like she's love, but it's not the vessel of love. It's not the klipa or the skanda of love, or even the mara, the poison of love. It's actually the rectification of it, because it's just luminous and empty. She's there and she's not there. She's the primordial truth, kind of, you could say. So I like dancing, and sometimes you see her at the moon and sometimes you don't, but it doesn't negate the fact that she is there. That's what sort of like the metaphor, right? Like the truth is the truth, regardless if we recognize it or not. I don't know. I think it's deep.
You know, something with this. Now, you were saying you think that, I guess whatever that thing is that she's standing on, that would be Netzach? Is that what you were saying before?
I think it's Yesod, because she's standing on a moon disk. If you read the text that goes with the image, it's called a moon disk. But there's other times where she can stand on a sun disk. And when she stands on the sun disk, actually her leg is depicted standing on the other foot.
Yeah, well, I guess that actually works better with what I was thinking, because just looking at this, going with the dancing and the way that she's bent, this is a stretch thinking about the hyaloid canal, and if she was on top of the lens, that would determine which way the light's going to go. You're going to be sucking it in. I don't know. I could see like switching a polarity in a sense.
Well, that's what it is, right? Because it's interesting, because you could say that the daughter is like the fifth. Like there's it's Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, but then if you add the dragon in, because if you're saying that Hod is tripartite, there's three expressions. But she also stands on Rahu.
Well,
so there's two expressions right there, right?
If she stood on both legs, she'd be straight, and now she's on one and she's curved. So I would see that as the hyaloid canal being, extended all the way, and the pupil being bigger. And then when she's bent, it's because it's pulled back and the pupil's smaller.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that.
Maybe the arrow was even showing the tension of pulling or pushing. I don't know.
Yeah, pulling, because you're calling. That's one of her powers, I guess you could say, is the calling of names, or the naming of things. So the arrow is like the light or the color, you could say, the name of the color or the name of the word that sort of names the things that we see. So I definitely think that there is like a relationship between like perception and the icon.
Well, that goes back to sort of the heatless fire, because there's no way to stop it. There's no way to stop any of the oxidation process. So as you're looking at it, there's no way of preventing it. There's, you're not the one doing it. It's always happening, and it's not something that can be stopped.
Well, in Buddhist ontology, we would say that desire is the cause of the kind of negative aggregation of heat. So if she is desireless desire, it kind of rectifies that paradox. That's how we would describe it. I'm not saying that people have to believe that, but that is how we would describe it, is that the oxidization is happening, but because she is literally flux, like an aeon in flux, she's dancing. It doesn't matter, because we're not grasping. We're not like the planetary deities are the grahas, the graspers. So we don't grasp we're not supposed to anyway. Of course we obviously do, but when we do that, we create aggregation, like her brother. Like he creates the paths or the tunnels, you could even say, between the spheres. But she kind of lets that go. Everything's kind of like free. You're like kind of like, okay, I'm not attached to it. Like I can let it go. Like it's okay. Because it's like love. That's the whole idea, is that she rectifies it through love.
Yeah, dude, this is beautiful, man. I love everything you're sharing, and it reminds me of some of the symbolism related to Sagittarius, right? Because he is the archer. But what I've heard, like with Kyudo, which is like a martial art of archery in Japan, that the whole entire thing is that the hardest part to master is actually letting go of the arrow. And that you're not trying to hit the target, you allow the target to be hit. So it just kind of reminds me of some of what you're talking about with desire, right? Not desiring. And that also kind of reminds me too, a little bit, this heatless fire thing of Sagittarius too, because Sagittarius, if I'm not mistaken, is like the mutable fire sign. And so if there ever is a sign that is like more symbolic of heatless fire, I think you can kind of maybe say that Sagittarius is versus the other fire signs. So just a few observations here.
It would be the ultimate flow state.
In looking at the outline of her encapsulation, it has a kind of abstract face, with her head being a kind of elongated third eye, and her robes being her eyes. And the robes very much remind me of snakes.
Well, she's wearing 13 nagas. Let me just say that she's wearing.
Okay, so they are. Okay.
Yeah, she wears no, don't be sorry. She wears the 13 Naga kings, so the kings of the the sort of the supernal ocean, or not supernal, excuse me, the blood ocean, the kings of the blood ocean. She's wearing that as her bridal jewelry.
So they are snakes, and they kind of look like eyes if you are looking at it abstractly. I was going to say with Ganesha too, he, like Mercury, is everywhere, right? Like there's the story with he and Vishnu are competing to see who can travel the world fastest, and Vishnu is very fast, and Ganesh has a rat to roll on. But everywhere he goes, Mercury / Ganesh is there.
Well, there's something interesting, right? Like, because Ganesh is like he's like the production of synthesis. Like, he's like the product of what happens when the mother is left to her own devices. So in a way, he's incomplete, whereas Vishnu is the worldly hero. In like how Nick said, like the hero's journey. Vishnu can take off. He can fly on his Garuda and travel the whole tree and go up and become what's called the Lion King. We talked about this when we did Leo. It's like Naram Simha. And then what happens? He eats heaven because his desire grows. He starts to eat all the people in the palace. Whereas this is more Buddhist, so Ganapati is more of like a lesser figure, but he's often included in images with her because they share this like more Puranic or more Indian connection, but they're also in the same Buddha family. this lotus family. So he's really a subordinated deity in Buddhism to her, where she is like a complete Buddha. But he's an expression of a Buddha. He's like a form a Buddha can take. That's how it's thought of. I know that's kind of weird, but that's more how it's thought of. So she's more the higher expression, just like she stands on Ketu, or not Ketu, excuse me, Rahu, and he stands on Ketu, which is kind of the lesser expression of the dragon, or the lesser power, you could say. Because she's able to fully, his whole desire is, at least in Buddhism, is that the dragon wants to climb back up. It's like he feels unfairly knocked back down. He feels like the middle tier deities haven't like given him a fair shot at ejection from the cube, you could say. But in Buddhism, it's saying, oh yeah, okay, Team Dragon, like let's go, let's move up, like let's do the upward lightning strike and the downward lightning strike. Like both of those things are you.
So another observation here, man, I mean, this is pretty loaded. I really like looking at this. But so Sagittarius corresponds with the thighs, and thigh symbolism is closely related to leg symbolism. But the femur is like the largest bone, strongest bone we have in our body. And so it does have like a lot of significance to it. And then I'm just kind of noticing a few things about her thigh. I don't know if her right foot is intended to kind of like bring our attention to her thigh with the leg that she's standing on. And then just the fact too that like the breadth of the figure she's standing on is like going towards the thigh as well, I think is kind of interesting. It just seems like there is like some attention kind of being drawn towards that area. So I had to mention that just briefly.
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's why her foot is protecting her yoni, right? Like it is the sort of idea that it's up to her. It's totally her choice, like her will, her choice, no access, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And then there's also something interesting about Ganapati, as we call him, Ganesha, is that he can be depicted as a bachelor deity, but in Buddhism, when he's a tantric deity, he's actually has he's lithophilic as well. He has a huge erection, you could say, and he is depicted with his two wives. So there's something also interesting there. Like he can be like chaste, or he can be very sexual, very tantric sexual.
What I like to do with the images that you show is to kind of let my eyes blur a little bit and see if there are any other kind of esoteric images. And in this case, what I see is the nagas that she's wearing kind of form these two eyes, and below that, below what she's standing on, is this kind of lotus mouth. And then the two Dahinis below her kind of start to make a kind of a DNA spiral just from the contrast of the colors. And if you think about her third eye, that would be right in the yoni right there that she's covering, and sort of like the crown chakra above that would be the fire above that. Do you kind of see what I'm looking at?
Absolutely.
Well, as you know, Headless, we don't use the 7 system in Tantra. We use 5. But so you're right in that where her third eye would be, where would be the crown chakra in the Tibetan system. But it's not, because as I was saying when Lisa brought up the thing about the nerve, like how Quicksilver treats nerve diseases or nerve pain. So it also causes nerve damage. But interesting. But because of the way that I guess you could say the lingam or the penis is connected, there's the green light that's at the tip. That's considered to be its own chakra. So what you do in visualization is you take the green light and you move it up, all the way up. So there's an idea that you move it to your throat, and then you can move it to your upper. So when you do this emerald light, that is what her thing is. It's like it's this purified Mercury is really what it is, or purified emerald. So it's like a philosopher's stone kind of, like it's like it doesn't have any aggregation, it doesn't have any lust, it doesn't have any desire. It's totally gone. It's just like love in this empty, which is luminous and massless way. It just like exists. It's just like ephemeral. It's like pink. And we even spoke about this several times, and I know T's just spoken about this, but pink as the spectral color. And that's really her color, is like pink. It's like a color that exists and doesn't exist. Our mind kind of projects it onto a crystal matrix.
Well, I was thinking more along the lines of the type of meditation that would get you over the abyss. Like, it's not something you can force. You know, it's not something you can, push your way into. And if she's the one kind of blocking the third eye from having any access to force, it would have to be on her terms or in that sort of heatless fire.
This is where I get into where I think you need the male and female to work hand in hand in order to make things happen.
That pink reminds me of mauve, and Kenneth Grant, wrote about going beyond the mauve zone, and that's like a whole entire thing. I have not read that book, but it kind of looks similar to mauve a little bit too.
Well, there is that idea, right? Like when it's that color, that mauve, like that darker purple color, that's a different expression of the female power or the force. Like you brought up force, Headless. Well, the female dakinis are the force of the Buddhas. They are like the kind of expression of, you could say, eminence in the world. That's not a perfect way to describe it, but that's one way to describe it. It's like the breath flowing outwards, and then it takes expression in light. So she isn't blocking. She is a you could say that she is existence appearance. She's what appears in front of us. Just like I said, she's dancing at the moon, but what is also at Yesod? Yesod is also the threshold to death. It's one of them, because there's also access from Tiferet. But you can also access it through death. So it is crossing the abyss in a way. But it's doing it without desire. It's kind of, you've traveled up already, and then you're coming back down and you're saying, oh, okay, it's actually here, and I'm able to access it at any time. And I will walk through when I walk through, instead of grasping. You're kind of letting it go. Like Nick has talked about this. Like when you go to have magical experiences, you kind of just let it flow. That's what her whole idea is. She's dancing. She's flexible.
As some would say, you can't lose the result.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There you go.
If I may interject, I think this image perfectly describes Mercury. And the reason that I believe that is because, so when you first find Mercury, you find it in cinnabar or vermilion or whatever, and it's red. Mm-hmm. Inside is Mercury. Now, and I don't know if you said this already, Jen, but the only, I guess, element that helps to separate all of the impurities away from gold, or the way that you get pure gold, is through distilling it with mercury. Right. And so when you look at this image, you know that Mercury is inside, and she's sitting on top of a lotus, right? Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And lotus is known to follow the sun, or to open with the sun, almost illuminating what is inside with the sun. And so you were talking about how she identifies and names things. She's giving illumination to what is, and she's kind of uncovering or shining a light onto that because of the mercury that has helped to distill, the pure gold. And I think gold in Buddhism represents the sun, doesn't it? Or am I wrong?
No, you're right, because there's a secret meaning of red, is that red actually transforms in Tantra into gold, rather than it rubido into citrinitis. Robby and I actually spoke about this too, is that there's the order of transformations is different, a little different in Tantra, or the meaning's like a little more articulated differently. Not necessarily different as in the meaning is different, but I think that maybe the process is slightly different.
Gotcha. Okay. That was it.
But I thought that was really beautiful that you said that, Lisa. So thank you so much. And I agree with you. I think she perfectly embodies Mercury from a secret knowledge perspective, because that's what she is, the goddess of secret knowledge, rather than Ganapati, who's the god of, like I said, exterior knowledge, or maybe even exterior wisdom. Because the female consorts are really wisdom. So that's also something interesting about Ganesh is that he can embody a kind of superficial wisdom, like also the superficial wisdom at Tiferet. Sometimes that can be institutional knowledge, institutional wisdom. Institutional science is very Tiferetic. So but it's this kind of like, it's shallow in a way. It's not inherently shallow, but the way the public perceives that knowledge is shallow, not understanding it fully.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think you've also got the ideas of Gemini perfectly encompassed there too. You've got sort of the elevated Gemini, and then you've got the lower Gemini represented in the dakinis, and then the figures on top of her head.
Well, it's not, they're not above her. Like in Buddhism, we would say that the figures above her are a different expression in a world of formlessness. So she is formless, but she's also existence appearance, meaning, just like Lisa said, like the sun's rays, like what you see in the world, Mahamaya, it's just the light illuminating the planets and the stars. It's just the illumination of the garden or the carnal ground. So that's what it is. But she's also rectifying the sun. He's also there, as you can see in the upward image. It's called Havajra. So it's a couple in coitus. So her name, I'll just give it because we're looking at it, but her name is She Without Fixed Self, and his means diamond thunder breath, or the adamantine breath. So when they're in union, it is his thought that gives expression that she then takes form in the world as a dakini. But it's not that they're distinct, is what I'm saying. That she's just an expression of that, but in herself, she's also the fullness.
That perfectly describes conception, because when you think of the shape of a sperm cell, it's almost diamond-like. And when you think of an oocyte or an ovum, it is formless, so to speak, and it doesn't begin to take form until the diamond has penetrated into the ovum itself. And granted, they color code this stuff, but at the moment of entry of the actual spermatozoa into the ovum, you have about 600,000 zinc ions explode, and so you almost have a glow around it, and it's like a zinc bomb or something, but it has that green glow. And I know that they put it under a bioluminescence, but that's the color they chose.
It's the zinc calcium reaction.
Do what?
It's the zinc calcium reaction.
Yes, but it has to do with zinc mainly because of the amount of zinc ions packed in within the zona pellucida of the ovum.
And zinc would be the metal of Jupiter, or basically the father of Mercury. And gestation requires zero concentration. It requires absolutely no conscious effort on the part of the mother, other than to feed herself and everything else. It's perfectly sort of like it does it all on its own. No desire necessary.
Yeah, I mean, you do have a lot of shutting down of a lot of physiological processes by the fetus to quiet the mother so that she doesn't reject the fetus, because he or she is half foreign to her. So that's, pretty much.
Great stuff, Jen. Dude, that was awesome, man.
Well, thank you guys, and thank you, Lisa. And I just want to end on that. I know that Lisa's talked about like a 49-day cycle for gestation, and also there's also an idea maybe of her as parthenogenesis, maybe, or the idea of like your sort of ancestral eggs, your ancestral ovums, like she's like the matrilineal, the mRNA, you could even say, and that's what it is. I could see that too, and I think that there's room in Tantra for all of the expressions of like interpretation. So thank you guys.
That's a really interesting fun fact that I think sometimes people don't realize. So like, for instance, the ovums that I would carry were first generated or synthesized in my great grandmother,
right,
and then passed on. And so you carry, at least females carry the ancestral lineage of their grandmother's ovums, as they were developed and so forth. And then, yes, it is a mitochondrial DNA that is only passed maternally to all, obviously male and female, but it's a natural line.
Also interesting to note that we just passed Epiphany, and Mary Magdalene is often celebrated in Epiphany with the production of the red eggs. So yes. Also something very interesting about that, and like what we're talking about in ovum and like a daughter and red and all this.
Yes. It's interesting because Nick and I have kind of done some deep dives on that.
Yeah. You know what I find interesting? Homily 33 is what determined she was a prostitute.
MM.
Yeah. TJ, these are your slides. I know you only had 2 of them. I don't know if you wanted to get in on these now before it starts getting too late.
Well, yeah, I even just want to add with like the sperm entering the egg too, because I've had very spiritual experiences where that's like happened to me, where like I am the sperm and I have to navigate through the body into and find the egg. And yeah, it's not the first sperm that gets to the egg. And once you get to the egg, you have to vibrationally align with that egg. You almost need a passcode as a messenger as well. So that's even in like different kind of spiritual experiences, you get to the door of the castle and they're like, what is the magic word to get through or whatever. That's the best way I could describe what my experiences were like. So I think that just adds to that and fits with the messenger of it all.
Mm-hmm. They ask you about the weight of swallows or some shit when you get there. For like Monty Python.
For me,
that is true in that the sperm and the egg are basically calling to each other once the sperm enters into the vaginal canal. And it's almost like cicadas when they call to each other, or mating birds between each other. They identify each other's vibration within the song or whatever, and they're calling to each other. Yeah, that's true. It's not the fastest, it's not the longest, it's which one vibrates the best with the actual ovum.
Well, with the Greek mythology, they say that the very first born was this Phanes protogonos who erupts out of the Orphic egg, which is the egg with the snake wrapped around it. So you've got that egg and sperm symbolism right there. And also Phanes was this burst of light, going back to that zinc calcium reaction. And also it looks so like the original version of Phanes looks so much like that magician card from the Thoth tarot that it's really hard not to draw the linkage between Phanes and Mercury as well. And also that would really put a lot of weight behind Mercury as being the central figure of everything, because of the fact that protogonos means firstborn, and this is like the firstborn, and then from that everything is burst out. So you've also got the idea of the Big Bang sort of packed into this Mercury symbolism.
Here we go. Back to here.
And I know we've been saying how like we've been associating the color green, and like there's also this side of the orange. One thing that's kind of cool is I was a chef at a restaurant called The Green Door, and my dish guy's name was Ganesh. So I just have this included that there is a Pantone color called Hermes Orange. There is a very famous purse by the company Hermes in Paris, Hermes Paris, pair, twins, Gemini, and the orange bag. Mercury oxide is like you can find it in batteries, you can find it in makeup, and all these kinds of things. And it is one way that we do get this orange dye is with this mercury and oxygen, HGO, I'm pretty sure it is. And then in Gemini season happens in May. May backwards is yam. Yams are orange, and it's May. You may, like you have permission to, like I think that fits a lot with Mercury, that you have permission to enter the other realms. You have permission to pass through the doorway. So I just have that I do think that there is this undertone of, or not undertone, but just like this orange that does exist. And if we're talking about it as like a phallic sense, the orange chakra is the sacral chakra. So that just adds to that as well. And that's the creation, the creativity, all of that.
Turmeric, just like Ganesh, made of turmeric.
Excellent. Yeah, great weaves, man.
And then you got one more here, right?
Yeah, it's just like some gematria. There's two that I don't include here that would be on the left that Jin mentioned, which was princess and daughters, also matches with Mercury in the English ordinal. And then on the left I have there with that 618 is very relevant because in the golden ratio, the first three decimals, the first three numbers, it's 1.618, so on and so forth. 103 is also a prime number. It's the 27th prime number. So you have 27, 27 club. You also have, it's a very ritualistic number, the number 27. In the police code, like there's 10-4, they have like, oh, we got a 10-22, blah, blah, blah. They have all that. 10-3 means like shut up, which I think is kind of clever with like a Mercury kind of thing. Cause like, I don't know, you meet a Gemini, they don't ever shut up. That's like kind of what they're known for. It's like, or like the Mercury ruled kind of people like seem to talk a lot kind of thing. So like if over the radio you call it 10-3, it means like keep the line clear because important information is about to come through. We have September, which Virgo season's in September. You know, like the trickster kind of thing fits. The BS matching with that is very interesting. Lessons, sorcery, you know, leprechaun, because now we have the Irish, then we have the green and the orange. You know, and then we have anointing, enlightenment, virtual counting, the proof. I think it just fits with that kind of thing as well. One thing I also wanted to point out too is that the two letters for the element Mercury are HG. And if you're to like kind of decode that quickly, H is the 8th letter, G is the 7th letter. So if you were to take that into the numbers, that would be mastering your reality to create inner harmony. Mastering your reality, the 8 and the H, to create the inner, the G and the 7. And then 8 plus 7 equals 15, 1 plus 5 equals 6, the harmony. So that's cool that exists there. Mercury matches with astrology. The drive, there was kind of a lot. I think like Uber was like, that's not mentioned there. I think Uber was showing up in the matches. Humpty, like Humpty Dumpty, but Humpty matched it as 103 as well. I just didn't have it there. And then the 6-6. So the Agrippa key as well in the middle, that's just your Latin or your Jewish cipher. But the 6-6, the 66th prime is 317. So Mercury equals 317 when you apply the Fibonacci cipher to it. But then that's very interesting because Saturn in the prime cipher equals 317. And 317 is one of my favorite codes because you flip it around, you flip it upside down, you get the word lie upside down. And it's the 66 prime, so it's like what lies upside down? Butterflies and bats. I don't know what else lies upside down, but those two specific things lie upside down.
Humans.
Human. And then even bald eagle matching with that, because I've often said, like, I don't know if it's a stretch, but America, you got that mare in there, Mercura, like it's kind of in there as like this mercurial kind of thing as well.
Eagle by itself equals 31, which is weird.
Well, and the Masons call the star of Sirius Merca.
There you go. America.
Yeah, like America, exactly.
Merca sounds like Birkin, which is like the Birkin Hermes bag, the orange one.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
And then the fact that it's a bag too, it reminds me of just Hermes being the messenger of the gods, having a little satchel or a container with him to deliver things.
You're going to put a BA at the end. You got Merkaba, which is the idea of the chariot.
Oh, yeah. There you go, man. That's a great one.
Awesome.
I'll just mention real quick regarding Saturn. There is a relationship between Mercury and Saturn. And so sometimes they're kind of considered to be almost like the two ends of a spectrum. I guess, right? Between the young and the old. And as we know, Saturn likes to prey on the young and feed on the young and things like that. And so there's old alchemical illustrations where basically Saturn is cutting off the legs of Mercury, basically. And some authors have kind of likened that to how the older generations prey on the youth. And, you know, there's a lot kind of going on there alchemically, basically. But it's like he's stunting, you know, Mercury's movement forward and whatever, because Saturnian figures don't want to get dethroned by the next generation.
So also with Saturn in alchemy, and Paracelsus and other, they call lead, which is the metallic element of Saturn, they call it black mercury. Interesting.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah.
That's cool. I've never heard that before.
Yeah. And then there was one more thing I wanted to bring up. The T, or the Tau, was called the instrument of death. A lot of people say that Christ was crucified on a T or a Tau. And it's also the emblem of the Tyrannus or Thoth, or Tetuates or Tot or Hermes or the Buddha. And it's called the Crux Hermes in the Old Hebrew, the Basculon, the Plasgian, the Etruscan, Coptic, and the Punic. And it was symbolized by the X, either or the plus.
Makes perfect sense. You got the plus sign at the bottom of the Mercury glyph.
Right,
so there's that. You have the crossroads, some of the cross stuff that we were talking about earlier. And I know that there's other glyphs for Mercury that basically include a cross, pretty much.
Yeah.
So, that totally lines up.
I got a weave for you, Mario. So, you know the globus cruciger?
Yeah.
Sphere
the
with
holy
the
hand
cross
grenade.
on top of it? Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's the inversion of the Ankh.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's
And
also
so
the inversion of like Venus too.
Well, the Ankh would be the idea of, you know, this sort of Hermes energy, and then the globus cruciger would be kind of the antimony, or the kind of more lead-like energy. And so you've got
Saturnian.
so they're just sort of reversals of one another. And we were dancing around Saturn all night, but it's the Hermes that goes across all boundaries. And so this time angle, if Saturn is time, then Hermes would be the time traveler.
Nice. I like it. I mean, that makes perfect sense, dude, actually, for a lot of reasons.
Robby, I was thinking about what you said. Oh, go ahead, Ethan. You can go.
Well, I have two things I wanted to share. I feel like I've been foaming at the mouth to share them because they encapsulate and depict so much of your presentation and what everyone has built on. The teacher aspect of Thoth Hermes is in part, of course, you know, as simple as fishing and canal building and so forth. But one thing I find interesting is the relationship of 8 as used and depicted by the kind of intuitive teachers of the planet, or the at least the divination practices that we still have. The runes created by Odin, who is a total Hermes character, in part, not in total. He brings the runes, which are actually at first 16, which of course is 2 8s, and then 24, and it's not only described as 24, it's described as 3 sets of 8, 24. The Thoth, of course, is kind of associated with the originator or teacher of the tarot, and he's also called the god of the Needers, one of his names, and that relates to the 8 Needers, or the 4 pair, really more kind of more specifically of masculine and feminine, the Ogdoad, which they're kind of these elemental aspects. Oh, and Odin has the 8-legged horse too. Who is his? He stands on these control of these elements. One could kind of relate to, and he can then go through these different dimensions and divinate, possibly in kind of the story anyway. And so the Ogdoad is the 8 elements of the Egyptian kind of cosmology, which goes right to the other Eastern version of Hermes and Thoth, Fuzi and Nuwa, who are depicted as entangled snake from their waist down, masculine and feminine entities. And Fuzi he brings all these basic instructions to humanity, including fishing and hunting and so on and so forth, just like Hermes, and also brings the 3 and the 8 in the form of the trigrams, the 8 trigrams, made up by broken and unbroken lines, three unbroken and broken lines, which unbroken and broken really reflects yin and yang, right? Is another kind of way for the Easterners to say yin and yang, broken being yin, yang being unbroken. And so you have the 8 elements in the I Ching reading, which is the divination, which is maybe one of the oldest divination practices that are still widely used. And certainly the I Ching, they say, is one of the oldest books that are still widely read. So there's these magnificent aspects of 8 elements leading into intuition. And one other thing, a separate thing, which goes to the 3 Trismegistus and the 3 Trinity relationship of the 2 pillars and the initiate in between, if you will. There's one story of Thoth being an assistant, which what's this?
Ophiuchus. You're talking about the 2 snakes. Time.
And so the Thoth Tahuti assists Ma'at in her judgment of the dead, and he assists everyone so many times. And in one instance, he assists Ra to obtain his eye, who kind of who got sick of him and got embodied by his wife, and they took off because they're over his temperament. Or temperamental frustration, occasional bursts, and he can't get her to come back with his eye. And of course, he gets Thoth to assist him, right. And Thoth has to ask her to return to Ra 1,077 times, which is 3 degrees short of 3 360s. Which, of course, Tahuti has mastery of the 3, so it's complete. And 1080 is also 108 times 10. And 108, of course, spiritually valuable and metaphysically related, but even it has some very neat mathematical attributes, which might be, what was happening in that story as well. So just the 3 360s in that number is just fascinating.
3 times 4 times 7 times 12, 108.
It's the degrees of a pentagram or pentagon. 108 degrees per angle.
It's also the prime number in Buddhism. Just want to say that.
And it's Thoth being the master of the Trismegistus, the master of 3, 108 also depicts the trinity of time. The 1 for the present, the 0 for the past, and the 8 for the infinite potential of the future.
Nice. I was just going to say, go ahead.
1.008 is the atomic weight of hydrogen.
That's interesting. Yeah.
With all the stuff coming into form is 108, 1008.
Right. I was just going to say regarding Odin, right, getting the runes as he was hanging from the world tree. you know, and this whole conversation, I've written down tree having a relationship with 3, which I think there's something to that basically. And then even, you know, it's been said, I think it was like did Pythagoras say it? Everything can be divisible by 3, divided by 3, beginning, middle, end, you know, sort of thing or whatever. So tree and 3 have like a correspondence to each other, in my opinion. And then we're talking about the serpent going up the tree and everything else. And then I was reminded of this too with Ganesh holding the axe. And it's like, what is the axe used for? You chop down a tree. The tree is a symbol of the world axis, right? And so I think there is a relationship with the axis as well. And then the world axis being an axle, right? So there's all these sort of things swimming in my mind, but I could talk to you guys forever. I mean, seriously, this is like a really powerful crew, and I always learn a lot. So thank you guys for sharing.
Yeah, you guys, props and respect to everyone. This is like occult AI. I learned like more than I could from AI.
Great. Oh, I love it. Is everybody good? Does anybody have anything else to say? So we could probably wrap it up here then.
I just want to add one really quick thing. Is Tej said the 10 plus 3? Well, that's really interesting because in Kabbalah, the 10 plus 3 or the 13, that is the number of hearing, the hearer, the perceiver. So you're saying like the police say that, so shut up, because you can't hear anything, you can't perceive anything if you're speaking, right? Yeah. So that's really interesting in that number specifically.
And
I agree.
Getting into all that, the whole idea of the divine silence, you know, is what Hermes constantly talks about. And also, you know, before we go, the idea of taking all this, you know, divine sacred information and hermetically sealing it into, you know, so you also have that ideas of the hermetically sealing, you know, occulting information, essentially.
Nice. Thank you.
To build on Jen's just really quickly, what T said about 10, 103, if you multiply 10 by 3, you get 30. And that's when Jesus had performed all his miracles, the Lazarus, the water to wine, the loaves, all of that. That was when he was 30. Or that's what is written.
Because he comes into his full understanding.
Right.
Yes. And then dies at 33.
Right.
Awesome. Something I just wanted to add real quick, just weird stuff that popped into my head while Robby was talking and just now, and then we could wrap it up. You know, when you were talking about, I think it was Saturn taking off his legs. You know, again, I have talked about how, like, when I'm messing with magic, at some point it's like things like starts disappearing. You know, like at one point I said, like, it does feel like energy is rising up my body and everything below it disappears, and it does at some point feel like my legs are gone. And I do go deaf, and you're just talking about silence. So,
right.
I mean, I have experienced both of those things, I think. So I just wanted to throw that in there. There was other things too, but it's been
I have to mention the 13th card of the Major Arcana is Death, and in the early days, this is the only card that did not actually have a name printed on the card because you didn't want to invoke death by saying its name, basically. So there's a whole thing with silence with that too. So
interesting.
Anyway.
Well, thank you all. This was, you know, better than I could have expected. It was just as good as all the other ones. I really appreciate it. Again, we had Lisa, the Occult Reject Mad Scientist. We had Jin, the Ninja. We had Ethan Indigo. We had TJ. We had the Headless Giant. And we had Robby Marx. All the links are in the bottom. And thank you for the guest, Mario. Again, it's a pleasure. It's always great, you know, learning with you. And look forward to doing much, much more work with you.
Likewise, man.
Hell yeah. And that is the end of another Occult Rejects. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.